Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Happily Never After show. I'm your host, Kate Mollison, and I'm here with Maggie Britton, a professional organizer. And we're going to talk to you guys today about some personal struggles that I've been having with organizing and moving and letting go of some of the things that are still lingering. I've certainly done podcasts in the previous in the past where I've talked about letting go of people's things and honoring your loved one and finding creative ways. But I didn't realize I was still in the throes of it, Maggie. So yeah, let's dive in. You want to say hello to the listeners?
Yes, hello. Thank you, Kate. You are far from alone in thinking that you have made progress, but then you realize that, oh my goodness, there's still so much to process and get through. But I am, as you said, a professional organizer. And, first you hear that and you might think pretty bins and baskets and
My Pinterest board brain is like a buzz.
exactly. However, in order to even get to those places of whatever you might goal it might be, if it's an Instagram post, whatever, that's really so much a small part of what I do. And the bulk of what I do is really help people process their relationship with their physical items and what they own and why they own them, how they came to be, and how to gain that confidence in identifying what is clutter and what is actually contributing to your life in a good way and what's just extra. And so working through that with my clients, it really turns into a decluttering focus. But as the professional organizers, we're there to support them through that process and then make space.
Yeah, two things instantly come to mind when I'm hearing you talk. The first thing is the TV show Hoarders, which I feel like that is just one extreme of it. And I'm sure you've encountered some glimpses of that. But the other is like Marie Kondo, and that, like, if it doesn't spark joy, throw everything away. But I feel that those are potentially opposite ends of the same spectrum, where Marie Kondo is very much minimalist and throw it away and less is more. And the hoarder mentality is emotional attachment to physical objects. But with both theories, I guess I should say, it all comes down to that mental, emotional capacity to relate to your belongings. And so it really sounds like you end up being someone's therapist to a degree.
Absolutely. There's so much how your thoughts and what's actually going on inside is oftentimes a reflection of what's happening on the outside in your space. And as you said, there are extremes. And I have worked on, people who just want that minimalist approach, and also the people who are literally just trying to make a path to their kitchen. So there are extremes, but for the bulk of the population, it's just trying to simplify and to reduce and eliminate some of the mental clutter that comes with clutter.
And I don't think we stop to realize that there is mental clutter. I love the way that you say that, because for me personally, I am a minimalist at heart, but I grew up with, parents who came from a poverty mindset, who came from, generations of depression mindset. So you hang on to everything, the bread bag ties and the soda tabs and the empty, aluminum cans, and anything that can find a new purpose or a new role to save money. Everything was good to the last drop and then lingered, right? So when I became an adult and I got my own space, it was a less is more and a purge. And if it sits in a closet for 6 months, then I'm throwing it out or dropping it off at Goodwill. And then I married Craig, who also had hoarder tendencies. Much love to him. And he wasn't a hoarder, but it was like picture frames literally touching each other on the wall. floor to ceiling, and closets just exploding. You would have to dig everything out to get to that one set of sheets that actually fit your bed. Because why do we have 17 sets of twin sheets but no twin beds in the house? Oh, because they were his when he was a child, or his kids when they were younger. And even though they're grown and have bigger beds, there's a nostalgia to it. And then blending two lives and going and moving into a house. And it was, thankfully we had the space and I made it work. I was much about like covering the chaos, if you will, those pretty bins, like you said.
100%. Yep.
But then it comes to after he passed away and I had to move and I had to downsize. I went from a 4,000 square foot house to a 1,400 square foot condo. And what I could put in my condo that felt very much aligned with my new identity and my new vision. And it was a lot of new furniture or repurposing furniture and getting rid of what didn't serve me. But to a degree, there was a large portion that just got shoved in a storage unit. And I'm now at a place in my life where I have a very healthy, well, successful romantic relationship. We are buying a house together. We are cohabitating and merging our lives. And I've had to revisit this storage unit. And I've been there a couple times. You know, I keep my holiday decorations there, and which is a whole other thing that maybe you can help me with at some point. That's like 37 bins for 2 holidays. But there's some stuff that just got shoved into the back of the storage unit. And as I'm starting to like pull things out and like really reassess 3 years later, what's in there, it's an emotional upheaval. It's a physical upheaval. It's trying to, oh God, now I have to make a decision about this nightstand that was his when he was a kid. And I'm kind of feeling like he's laughing at me a little bit because he's saying, haha, now you know what I was thinking when I didn't want to get rid of those twin sheet sets. But it's different, you know? So how do I approach this project that feels so incredibly overwhelming? Where do I start?
Well, you've already started without even realizing it, because you know that this is going to be a lot for you to process emotionally, mentally, and physically. Like the physical aspect of clearing out a storage unit or any space that is full of things is also physically demanding. So by acknowledging the fact that you know it's going to be hard is huge, because you can't just jump in it and assume that you're just going to go in there and it's going to be an easy donate, toss, we'll keep this, right? So you already are stepping into the process, because when I'm working with my clients in person or online, I have a 4-step process. And the first step is clear, and that's clearing your mind before you even get into the space. Because if you're not there, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be all, rainbows and sunshine, but by recognizing that it is going to be a mental process and that you're going to have to clear and work through those thoughts that are coming up and those feelings and the narrative. And like you said, his like almost laughter, that you're already, those are all things, right? So congratulations to you. You are already
thank you. That makes me feel better.
Right path forward, 100%. So then,
and I definitely was naive going into it, because I showed up at the storage unit a couple weekends ago and was like, we're going to just take like 6 hours and I'm just going to knock this out. Like, no problem. I'm going to, bang this out. And I got in there and I got like halfway done and I had to stop. And I was like, ooh, maybe we'll finish this another day, because physically I can't do it by myself. It's it's a huge storage unit. It's a climate controlled facility. There's big pieces of furniture in there. And I have just been opening the door and shoving things in there as I'm finding they're not serving purpose in my day to day, which was really an avoidance tactic I'm finding.
And honestly, and one of my favorite quotes is, clutter is nothing more than delayed decisions.
Ooh, and I like that.
So when you recognize, which is okay, because we're not always ready to make those decisions, right? You had a loss. That doesn't mean you have to go in there and process that right away. You might need that time, and you might need to start elsewhere, which you also have already done. You already said that you have minimized and simplified your space where you are living already. And so
Yes.
I am sure you're already recognizing the benefits of living with less in your personal space right now. And
Game
so
changer.
if you can write down, I would even, you know, make some mental notes, write it out into a journal, whatever it is that you're using, start to focus on the pros of how that's making your life that much clearer and simpler
Mm.
by, why is that working for you right now to have less? Is it giving you more space to pay attention to what matters, like that new relationship, like
Mm.
creating that next new phase? That's all that space, that's time and energy that allows you to welcome in the new things,
Which is
and your
hard, having had
day
a
to day
loss,
is easier.
being
Right.
okay, welcoming new and letting go of old. A
Yes.
lot of widows, widowers, people who've experienced grief or loss struggle with that concept. But the reality is those two things can coexist. We can have
Absolutely.
that
Absolutely.
appreciation for less, and whether that be physically less, a tangible minimization, or an emotional decluttering, like you mentioned. Um, but there's a gratitude and appreciation. And so I appreciate that challenge and that mindset, because I am very good at compartmentalizing as well, where I go, yep, don't need it, and I minimize, and then I don't ever reflect on if it's working or why it worked or how I can apply that to other scenarios move forward. So I
Absolutely. And
think that that's
that's what I call building the
incredibly
decluttering
poignant.
muscle. Like,
Ooh.
you are literally working that out. And when you are building that muscle, the next time you get to something, you're going to have that confidence. You're going to have a little bit more strength to work through it. So let's say you do go back to that storage unit, and if you're there and it's just you and you don't have someone like a professional organizer to do literally the heavy lifting and walk you through, decision fatigue is real.
So
And
real.
you can feel that physically as much as you can mentally. So if you don't have someone like a professional organizer working through that space with you physically, mentally, and you go back into there and you say, you know what, I'm going to start by whatever time I think is right, right? It doesn't, maybe it's not the 6 hours, maybe it's, you say 15 minutes, maybe you're there for an hour. It doesn't really matter. It's whatever you are able to keep building up and strengthening each time you go back to that storage unit. So let's say you go in and it is something that, you're stopping to think, does this make sense to come back in? Pay attention to that thought. Like, where did that thought originate? Are you pulling from somebody else's expectations of what you should have in your house, in your personal space? Of, like you said, the generation before us had a lot of preconceived notions of what that looked like, to prove that you were not wasteful, to prove that you had some sort of wealth by owning things. All of these things get hidden into your own thoughts. So when you're trying to make that decision, and like for the end table that you said, are you trying to talk yourself into making something important that actually to you is not? Even if it was to someone else, that doesn't make it any less. It doesn't mean that your internal feelings are any less by keeping this physical item or not keeping it. Because when we are able to hold memories internally and versus the physical item, that is certainly a huge step forward in recognizing that as you're going in there. And if it is a memory that you do want to keep, how are you keeping it, and where are you keeping it, and why are you keeping it? So if you can think of something that is a physical item that you want to keep because you are not ready to let go of it yet, or you find that it brings you back to a point of a positive memory, where can you store that you're actually showing care in how you store it? Where is it accessible in your daily life? Because if we're keeping it and we're not accessing it, why are we keeping it? If we're
Right.
not even looking at it, we're not even touching it, why do we have it? And usually if we're keeping it and not accessing it, we're keeping it out of guilt. And that
Yeah. And
guilt,
that's such a great point that you make, because that's really where it comes from for me. Is it's a twofold thing. So for me, it was important to him. And I feel like I'm doing a disservice by just trashing, even if I'm donating or repurposing, or to a degree, it feels like I'm just throwing away. And I'm so good at getting rid of the clutter around like paper products, like the kids' artwork and stuff. And everyone
Mhm.
always tells me, oh, you're brilliant. I take pictures of all of their art projects and I turn them into these cute little coffee table books. And then I've got these file boxes where I save the best of the best from every year for the school year. And all 12 years will fit in one little file box, including those photo books of art from each year. So it's a great way to snapshot their educational
Absolutely.
career and declutter that. And then I can just hand them that box of stuff when they are adults, and whatever they do with it is on them. But I've
Right.
now reduced, because think about how much artwork the kids bring home.
100%.
It is,
Yes.
and we feel guilty. I don't want to throw away all the macaroni art. So take pictures of it and put it in this cute little photo book, still preserved it, no clutter. But when it comes to Craig's stuff, I don't know if it's because he's passed on that there's a bigger piece of guilt where I have a hard time. And of course, all of the things that he has are not pieces of paper. It's furniture, it's his childhood nightstand, it's his personal library of over, I think he had like 4,000 books. So I have most of those books that I've saved. And there's a guilt for just getting rid of those things that were so integral to who he was. And it's a way of preserving him. It's this museum of who Craig was and is. But the other side of that is my daughter was only 19 months old when her father passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And her other siblings were, 11 and young adults, and they have active memory. So how do I maintain enough of a physical presence for her where she feels like she got to know her father, whether it be through his books, his physical belongings? There's something about touching the things that belong to someone else that make you feel connected. And there's a huge guilt in me. I don't want to get rid of too much because I want her to have the capacity to make those decisions. But how much is too much? And how am I going to feel if she just says, nah, I don't want any of it? And of course, I'm not letting her make that decision at 10
Right.
or 16 or even 18, because the way our brains work as a teenager, I don't want her to regret that. But how do I grapple with that? Because I'm sure this is
So,
heard
when
this.
I heard you saying the end table, these books, these were all things that he was holding on to. But there's a possibility, a strong possibility, that he was holding those things because in his mind, there was that behind the scenes narrative of these books represent that I'm a reader, that I'm a lifelong learner, whatever it is, right? Those were the physical representation. This end table, we don't know, why was it important? Did someone say, well, you should have that? That was your childhood, right? Was that coming from him, or was that coming from his own narratives, from
Mm.
the messages that he was receiving, the unspoken expectations that he now brought on, that you are now carrying, that you're now passing on to your daughter, right? So all of
Powerful.
these things are now being transferred physically and mentally, that expectation, the
Mm.
why should I keep this? So, sometimes I give the example of going through someone's house and maybe grandchildren are going through and deciding what they're going to keep from grandma who has passed away. And they say, oh my gosh, this plate was always in her room. She loved it. How do we know that she actually just didn't pick that up on the side of the road because she felt she needed an extra plate that day and it had no actual meaning? And now this plate is continued on for traditions because
Become a
someone,
family heirloom and it came
right,
from the
because someone
99-cent
put
store.
the importance on it. The importance wasn't
Interesting.
there. Everyone just put this perceived value on this item that we don't even, potentially didn't really have value to that person. So what I would do is find the memories that are important to you and to anything that your daughter could someday experience. And maybe some of that does mean adding photos into another album for her that you can go through and you can put captions and explanations as to why this represented him.
Mm.
And then maybe there's a few boxes that are carefully, intentionally curated in a way, because you even said, like, we don't want to have that museum. So let's pick the really, like, if there are 10,000 books, we don't need 10,000 books. Maybe there's two of the favorite who just as a whole represent who he was. Because if there's two books and maybe there is a picture in that photo of him and you're saying he loved to read, that's enough of a, like, that's a nice little thing to hold on to, just knowing that he loved to read or he loved to learn. But we don't need all the books to carry on her lifetimes to hold on to that thought and the idea, or the, the hope that too, that maybe she does encompass this love for learning or reading.
Which she does have, interestingly enough. It's funny that you bring that up. She loves to read too. And so she has her own little personal library. And
exactly, which is a whole other conversation as to, like, how does why does she have to keep each thing to represent that she is a reader, right? Like,
well, we have a cycle at the house because, again, in my living space, I'm very good that, like, if one thing comes in, two things have to go out.
Right.
That goes for closets, that goes for books, that goes for toys. Like Christmas and birthdays, I make the kids purge the bedroom. I give them an empty Sterilite tote and I say, I need you to fill this up. And that's Christmas. And then, so with my daughter, who still believes in Santa Claus, we talk about, we're going to give these toys to Santa and he's going to take them back to the workshop and he's going to repair them and give them to other little boys and girls who need them. So we put that tote out under the Christmas tree the night before. And then Christmas morning, that tote is gone and she gets her new toys, and it just keeps everything.
So it's really getting that.
Yeah.
You,
and we do that with books too. So I'll take her to the bookstore or to, like, we'll buy books secondhand even, because I'm a big fan of recycling and those kinds of things. But I'm like, all right, if we pick out a book today, we have to go home and go through your books and pull out two books that are, too young for you, or that you don't read anymore, or that you don't like. And then we take them to, there's a couple little free little libraries around town here. The little, they're like on telephone poles. So we'll add books to that instead of donating them where they might get trashed, because certain places like Goodwill and Salvation Army have standards. And if it's not well enough for them, it gets put into a landfill. And we don't want that. So we're trying to find ways to help her move forward that way. Yes. Why can't I do it with the storage?
Yes. Because I think, as you said before, he is no longer here. She is here. And like you said, and it goes back to that guilt that someone else might, that keeping all of this stuff doesn't necessarily minimize your grief. No. Right? But are you keeping it because there's an expectation from the other people around you that they think that might be minimizing your grief? So are you holding on to what they might be thinking, or because of what you truly believe? So if you can take those same principles that you're working within your own house and your daughter and do your best and just work through that storage unit. And the same thing, like somebody else, that things are not meant to stay with us forever, right? Those furniture pieces, there is someone out there, there is another life for them. And we don't know we can't decide what that next life is going to be. We don't get to decide who it's going to, or, that's another thing, is getting caught up on where things are going and making sure it's going to the very specific person. And so what I suggest when you're working with something in such capacity, like a storage unit of items, you need to focus more on making that room for yourself than
Mm,
be finding the perfect place for things to go. So that
yeah.
might mean at this point, for this specific process, you are doing bulk pickups, bulk donations, right? And that too probably pulls up some sense of guilt and wastefulness. Well, I'm not spending the time. I'm not, but guess what? It's just delaying those decisions.
Mm.
Or
And I
because you're
think
putting the energy into figuring out where can this perfectly go? I want to find
ensuring that it
this.
has a life that honors who he was and how he viewed things. And that's right. That's a very good point. I don't have to take on that burden of that decision.
Right. And you're
Um,
doing that in your own life already. Like you are able to, you are encompassing that sense of let's get rid of things throughout the year, right? So you're doing those, but this is different. So you might have to approach it differently. You might have
mm,
to approach it as I know these are the things that are going to go, and I am going to let go of them in a like one big pickup, so maybe that means scheduling around where I am. There are vets that do pickups.
yeah,
There are different charities that do bulk pickups. And so starting with the things that are a little bit more obvious that you're going to let go of and working your way back from there. Because
that's
like
a
you
great
said,
idea.
you're good at doing the more obvious things. So start with the more obvious. Maybe it feels a little less obvious, but there's going to be some more obvious things in that storage shed. Start with those. And
Mm,
again, as you go through that, you're going to build up that decluttering muscle. So when you get to the harder things and you're down to, okay, I'm down to 10 books, but this still feels like a lot of stuff to hold on to. You're going to find you're going to be better equipped. You're going to be stronger in making that decision with confidence that, okay, these however many books, that feels good to me right now. And you might find that in another 10 years, you're going through it again. You're saying, you know what? I feel that this many is good, right? It doesn't,
mm.
it can happen in different passes per se, right?
So it doesn't have to happen all at once.
100, especially with a loss, right? I mean, it's one thing if it is a bunch of clothes that just was a shopping spree that didn't hold so much emotional attachment,
Well, in
right?
all fairness, his dresser is in the storage unit. I literally moved it from the house straight into the storage unit, and it is completely untouched from the morning that he passed away. So it is still socks and underwear and pajamas, and why it feels abhorrent to throw those things out. Like, very clearly, my son could be using that dresser. And that just dawned on me recently as we're
Mm-hmm.
moving into this new house. And I'm like, oh God, I don't want to get rid of his dresser. What do I do? And I can't just leave it as this frozen relic. But
Right.
the idea up until this point of emptying out the dresser or getting rid of the dresser or even disturbing the dresser felt so incredibly monumentous. So it was just something that I've avoided. And I think about it for my daughter again, she didn't know him, no active memory. And his mother had passed on before he and I met, but she's got a great relationship with my parents and her siblings. And I come from a childhood philosophy where my mother was an only child, so she was big into genealogy. So looking into those family tree connections and that lineage, and she has pictures and birth certificates and all this stuff, and it was very cool to hold on to, and it helped me understand where I fit. And so wanting to preserve some of that for my daughter, like, who is her father, who is that side of the family? I think about school projects and whatnot, those family tree projects. I don't want to get rid of those pictures or those wedding announcements, but I don't need the wedding dress from his mother's third wedding. I
Mm-hmm.
don't need
Mm-hmm.
6 pictures of his great uncle Leopold. Like, I don't, one picture,
Absolutely.
maybe two would be sufficient because those all fit into one photo album. But I right now have a small tote of just pictures from his side of the family because I don't have the bandwidth to
Right.
literally hold up each picture and go, yes,
Right.
no. And that
And
feels
that's,
like,
I mean, photos are, that's, I always say that's like like get them all in one place. And that's the other thing is you want all of these things in one place. So if
like
you
items with like
know,
items.
right, because I find a lot of times what happens is there is an item in this room that was somebody's. There's an item over here. There's something stored underneath something and it's starting to deteriorate because it's in a cardboard box that's not really cared for. And then there's something else over here that, so if you can bring those all to one space and do you know that next space that you're moving into? You said you,
Yeah, we have a
so,
house that we're going into.
so if you know that there's one place in there that can represent a place to hold the things that are accessible to you and for the things that you need more time to process. And you
Mm.
identify that spot and use that as the boundary and the container in which to hold those items so that it's not in every different room. You know, maybe that dresser does go because it's being used and it has the life and you're bringing that back in. And maybe there's something else that can be framed and put on the wall so that's actually part of your life rather than just part of the
Mm.
boxes put away. You know, what can be used to display the books? Is that something that can go on a bookshelf and just be part of your everyday that you can just tap into and feel the positive energy, right? You also want to focus on really identifying the positive memories, right? We don't want to hold on to anything that has a negative energy around it, because the
Mm.
longer you hold on to that negative energy, the less space you have to bring in those new beautiful things into your life. And whether you realize you're holding on to it or not, it's there. It's in your space. It's in the back of your mind at all times. And we
Yeah.
want to let that go. And sometimes that's hard too, is saying, you know what, actually, that doesn't bring up a positive feeling for me. I'm going to accept that I'm surrounding myself with only things that make me feel good. And that's another like hard truth that has part of the process, right? Is saying, I may have loved this person, but this is not something specifically that I completely loved in this like small little
Yeah.
concept, right?
And it's funny. It makes me remember. So when him and I first moved in together, when Craig and I first cohabitated, um, he, having that hoarder tendency, had an amassed amount of things in his very tiny galley kitchen. And so when I moved in, I took it upon myself to like go through the kitchen cabinets. And I'm like, why do you have Girl Scout cookies from 1998? Why do you have 6 sets of dishes? Why do you have 3 oil fryers and none of them work?
Mm-hmm.
Why? And so I just started like pulling things out, and he called it the purge of aught 13. So the iconic purge. And so every now and then in course of conversation, it would come up and he'd be like, this reminds me of the purge.
Uh-huh.
And it became a running joke. So there's some of that memory component into doing this. Again, it's not lost on me,
Yep.
the irony and the detail in which I'm feeling those things.
Yeah.
But I struggle again with my daughter and her age, and what are the things that she may want as she becomes an adult and gets her own first apartment or goes off to college, and being able to take his, his nightstand or a assortment of his favorite books or a blanket or whatever. And then I have this whole storage tote full of his t-shirts, and someone suggested I turn those into a quilt or something for her. But there's the feeling of someone taking scissors to those shirts that feels awful. And there's nobody here locally that I've been able to find to do it. So all of the things I found, I would have to ship these t-shirts off to
Yes.
California or something and hope that this person does right by them and then sends them back. And that feels terrible. Or so it's lots of little things like that that create that decision fatigue. But I am proud of myself. I will say I did just think of a brilliant idea. So he has this big, massive book collection. And I have realized, I'm like, okay, I don't want to take it with me. I don't need to take it with me. It's not serving purpose. I do already have a small assortment of books at home that I'm using decoratively and at, on bookshelves. So there's a couple more I'll probably pull out and save just because they're not printed anymore and I had read them as well, and they do, they don't need to be displayed, but they are something I want to keep. The rest, I was like, he was a big involved in his high school. He was a great reader. So I reached out to his high school and I said, can I donate these to the library there at the school? And so we're in talks to do that, where I've gotten an embosser and I'm going to stamp the first page of the books from the home library of Craig Mollison, class of 86, and then be able to just have those books have another life in a way.
Absolutely.
Where someone's going to see that embossment and be like, oh, who is this guy? And oh, that's cool, or whatever it is. So it just is a way for him to keep giving back and to stay alive in a way.
Absolutely. And if there's things in that storage unit, maybe it's the furniture, maybe it's something else that has value in not value to you, but a value in terms of like selling, which I don't always recommend because that becomes a full-time job. But if there is something and you're able to sell that and take that money and donate it to whatever cause may have been important to him or you as a couple, and you can put that's another way of his life living on, is through a donation in that name versus it being a physical item, versus holding on to the end table that your daughter may or may not ever want because it doesn't mean the same thing as it means to you, right? So passing that on in another way, in another form, might be also an additional option to, keeping his memory alive without it being through physical items.
That is a really brilliant idea that I hadn't even considered in that capacity. So thank you for that. We are coming up on the end of our time together today. I feel like this has been really personally helpful for me, and there's so much more we could talk about in regards to organizing and loss and grief. But if you were going to give any advice to the grieving out there who are dealing with this, whether it be having to downsize or now revisiting some items, what advice would you give the listeners?
So one thing that has been proven is that clutter is directly related to trauma. And a loss of a loved one is trauma. Everyone is going to, of course, experience it in different ways. But if you're finding that this loss is, you start out and there's a situational disorganization that comes when there's major transition, loss, trauma happening in life, right? It's situational. Life is a little bit off kilter and things tend to go astray. That's situational. But when that situational disorganization becomes more and it's turning into a chronic disorganization, which then can potentially lead to hoarder disorder like tendencies or actual hoarding, the earlier you can start to process these things, your relationship with the physical items that represent someone who you have lost, the better. And it doesn't mean that process starts by you letting go, but it's this process of getting support from the right people and then slowly starting to take action. Maybe it's just one box you're starting to work through, working through slowly, working through the obvious stuff first, right? The stuff that doesn't feel so heavy, start by letting go of that. Start in the other places of your home. Because if you're starting other places of your home and you're building up that muscle of what adds value to your life and creates space to let more things in, including your own mental health, then start with the obvious and then build up. give yourself that time, surround yourself with support. And that might be a combination. It might be talking with a therapist or a trauma, informed health professional, or it might be bringing in a professional organizer just to have that other person there guiding you, asking you questions, working through that decision process of what's important and helping you. It's hard to identify what's important when you're looking at everything.
Yeah.
But when you have someone asking you those questions, it could be a friend, it could be a family member. But by holding you accountable, instead of spiraling through your own thoughts and your own purposes and reasons for holding on to things that could be pulling from guilt or, other narratives that you're hearing and just expectations from others.
Captain. Yep. When I had to move out of the house, my designated grief captain was that person who kept me from spiraling.
Exactly.
Totally.
So surrounding yourself with support is the first step, and then starting to take action and paying attention to that clutter is building up because of the delayed decisions, right? That you might have to find that time, right, of when it's appropriate or feels best or you're ready, and you might try and then you might back off and say, nope, not happening today, not happening next week, not happening this year. But if there are the more obvious things that you can work through, then start with the small things and don't put too much. Like, any action is better than no action. And if that action just looks like talking to someone about it, that is action, right? Rather than, and just recognizing too, are you holding on to physical items as a sense of protection and a sense of like a safety net where it feels safe? It feels like you're keeping that person alive through these physical things. That's when the clutter can truly start to build up. And just finding routine. What is that routine? Can you empty the dishwasher? Can you put away a load of laundry? Those simple daily tasks that sound simple, but can be really hard to initiate when you're going through trauma.
Grief and trauma, yeah.
Absolutely. But if you can find one thing to stick as a routine and you're saying, you know what, if I do anything today, it's putting the laundry away. And that's it. That's your action. Then that's your action. Because that.
I love that. I always say, like, in the early stages, one of the best things I ever convinced myself was, you know what, if I do nothing else today, I made the bed. And that was the one thing that made me feel like I was moving forward and not either going in reverse or staying stagnant. So I always say to people, if you can't clean the whole room, clean one corner. 100%. If you can't clean the bedroom, make the bed. If you can't make the bed, then just pull the covers up. It doesn't have to be Better Homes and Garden level, but just start somewhere and it will gain momentum. So I think that is really invaluable advice to the people in grief and trauma, that decluttering and organizing doesn't have to be those pretty bins and, fancy wallpapers and labels and chalkboard things. It can be as simple as putting your laundry in a laundry basket, getting it up off the floor, or throwing the covers up on your bed, or folding the blanket on the back of the couch. It could be that simple to start the process.
Absolutely. And I 100% believe that it's the cluttering is the catalyst of making space in all areas of your life. So if you're feeling lost, you're feeling like there's no clarity, start with decluttering.
I love that. What advice would you give to the support people, those non-professionals who are trying to help? In my instance, like I mentioned, my grief captain, she was there to say, do you really need 37 rolls of Christmas paper with like 2 inches on each roll? Probably not. Can you donate them to the preschool so they have art project stuff? Do you need 6 boxes of his cassette tapes when you have his iTunes login information where he uploaded everything? Probably not. And I got mad at her sometimes because it felt very intrusive, and I
Yes.
wasn't ready to let go of some of that stuff, but I didn't have a choice because I couldn't physically bring 4,000 square feet
Right.
with me when I went to
Right.
1,400, even with the storage unit. So what's some advice you would give to those support people who are helping?
Well, first, I would say that also don't be afraid of that feeling of discomfort, because sometimes we grow through discomfort, right?
Mm,
You're just going to have to pay attention to how heavy is that? Is this the time to push through? And that's something that that support team will have to kind of figure out as, is this a time to continue to push? Or is this as a time that we need to back off and come and revisit this, right? We want to make as many decisions in the moment that we can, but there are just times, especially with loss, that we need to revisit something. And so
mm,
if someone is helping a family member, know that it is so much easier for the person who is helping than it is the person who's making the decisions. And that if that person's starting to look like they're tired and that they are overwhelmed, it's because those decisions are heavy. So take a break. Take as many breaks as you need to. Break it up into chunks, right? It doesn't have to be hours. It can be a half hour here with a lunch, right? Or it can be 45 minutes and then a walk outside together, right? Those
ooh,
are also supportive ways of helping someone. And just by having that other, it's actually called body doubling. And body doubling is just by having that body literally there virtually. I do it virtually, right? I have a group. I'm on the other side of the computer. But if you have someone that can be in your home, maybe they're even just reading a book at the same time that you're going through a box of personal items of whomever you've lost, that is support in itself also. So it can look
mm,
very different. It doesn't have to look one way. It doesn't, there's no right amount to let go. There's no wrong amount. You get to decide, right? What is that feels good in that moment? And just remind them that our memories are not always in our things,
mm.
and that it is okay to let go for our own personal well-being.
Well-being.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So the other barrier I hear, especially from people, in widowhood, is the cost barrier. I hear professional organizer, and that sounds like a luxury item to me. But what is the reality of that cost for people who are interested in potentially hiring someone, because this feels so big and overwhelming? I would have loved to have had a professional organizer, but at the time it felt outside my purview. So I know it's different, obviously, geographically, sure, but
Yep.
what is a ballpark? What does it on average it cost to have
So,
a
and
professional
that's a,
organizer come in?
and the people who find me are the people who recognize. It doesn't mean like they come from all walks of life, from all economic situations. So it is the person who is reaching out to someone like professional organizer, like a decluttering coach. That could be in person, right? That's going to be your greatest investment, is having someone in there in person helping you physically work through it as well as mentally
Mm.
work through it. And it might just mean a couple hours, right? Like every organizer probably has a minimum. It's usually like a 3 to 5 hour minimum for a day. So maybe that's where you just start and you see, do I want to add on from there? Or
Mm.
virtually, can you, like, there's a lot of virtual options that are much more accessible to no matter where you're located, no matter what your budget is, so like I have a online group that's a small commitment, money wise, versus if I'm in person and I'm bringing my team of 3 people, or I'm
Mm.
just one-on-one working with you, there are options to get that support. It doesn't have to be, again, nothing is cookie cutter.
Right.
And and with more awareness of the benefits of living with less clutter and making more space for you,
Mm.
that just means there's just that many more options out there.
I love
That
that.
it's,
That's so great. I love that you made it feel super accessible too. So, well, thank you again, Maggie, for joining me today. I hope that the listeners out there found benefit in this conversation. I know I did. It has inspired me to get back into the storage unit, and I've already got the gears turning about some things that I can do maybe a little bit differently that I hadn't initially thought of. So just want to remind everyone that I am always available if someone needs to chat or reach out. Please visit my website, www.otwwb.com. Maggie, where can our listeners find you?
So you can find me. My website is Chesterfield Organizing Co. My Instagram is Chesterfield Organizing Co. So either there, you can send me a direct message on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. But any way that you want to find me, whether it's through my website or Instagram, that's your best bet.
I love that. And we'll make sure we include your contact info in our show notes for all of the listeners out there who are looking for some advice or support.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks again, Maggie. And until time with Grief and Gratitude, I'm Kate. Thanks for tuning in.
You've been listening to Happily Never After, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode of Happily Never After, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.